Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show with your host, David Lawrence.
Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources Podcast Show. I'm absolutely delighted today to have with me Adam Rimmer, who's the co-founder at FloodFlash. Adam, thanks for joining me.
My absolute pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Adam, and thanks for all the... I know we had some technical difficulties today with getting the sound right, so thanks for being patient and joining me. And look, welcome to the podcast show. Adam, I wonder if we can share with our listeners a little bit about you and a bit about FloodFlash, please.
Yeah, of course. And yet no problems on the technical difficulties. Working for a startup is nothing if not solving problems on the fly, which I think we have done soundly. So good work all round. My name's Adam, along with my co-founder Ian Bartholomew. We are the founding team of FloodFlash. So FloodFlash is an insurance intermediary that provides something called parametric insurance. And that means that it is insurance that pays not based on the cost of damage like a traditional policy, but based on a physical parameter that you measure, in this case depth of water. So we install a sensor that we have designed ourselves on the side of your premises, and if that detects that water has hit a pre-agreed depth, then we send you a pre-agreed amount in full, and you can spend that how you want, almost like a life insurance payout. And the reason that's good, and the reason it works, and the reason it's so powerful is that it removes so much cost and so much uncertainty from the underwriting process that it means for the first time we can provide flood cover in even like the highest risk locations all around the world.
Yeah, and that's great. And I was going to say, this is obviously a huge topic in the industry, in the news. Obviously, we've had lots of flooding effects up in the north of England, for example. What sort of brought you about coming up with the business, and how has that developed over the last couple of years since you started the company?
Yeah, really good question. So it really stemmed from work that Ian and I did in our previous job. So Ian and I met back in 2011 at working for a company called RMS, who are based out of California and are the world's largest catastrophe modeling company. So they build computer models of earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, even things like terrorist attacks and even pandemic disease spread, which is obviously particularly relevant this week. But Ian and I worked on their capital markets team, which meant that we would help to structure and model the triggers on a sort of large sort of reinsurance contract called catastrophe bonds. And there are some of those that were really the inspiration behind FloodFlash, and kind of one in particular that's probably worth touching on, which I'm sure everybody remembers Hurricane Sandy in the news back in October 2012, and of the sort of $20 billion of damage that happened in that event, a really big chunk of it was the subway when that flooded in New York. Obviously, hurricane, big low pressure center, picks up lots of water, pushes it in to Manhattan Island, and the tunnels are underwater. The subway had their insurance payout, but afterwards, struggled as in a situation that is analogous to what all sorts of, small businesses, local governments, homeowners all around the world face, struggled to get cover again. And so as part of the solution for that, we helped putting them together a reinsurance contract that essentially says if water levels get to 8.5 feet at the tip of Manhattan, as measured by tide gauge there, which is about the depth that would correlate with water flowing into the tunnels. So if something like Hurricane Sandy happened again, the subway would get paid $200 million straight away to start repairing those tunnels. And we saw that, and we thought that is so powerful. They've used this idea of parametric insurance, i.e. insurance paid out based on a parameter rather than cost of damage, to get cover that nobody else was prepared to give them. The only problem with those catastrophe bonds is that you have to spend several $1 million on investment bankers and lawyers to issue something like that. So it's out of the reach of all but kind of the largest companies and organizations. So that was really where the idea of FloodFlash came from, basically to take that same principle and use that to turn it into a mass market product to protect the livelihoods and the homes of people all around the world who struggle to get that cover. Every year there's something in the region of about $50 billion of damage due to flood, and only $9 billion of that is covered by insurance. So that means $41 billion every year is currently being borne by homeowners, local governments, small businesses, etc. Whereas parametric insurance is the most efficient way, we believe, to transfer that that risk to the balance sheets of those who are built to take it. So global insurance companies.
And I'm guessing then in that case, and thanks for explaining that, your customers could be, individual consumers, it could be landlords, businesses, I suspect, or is there something else I'm missing?
No, that's exactly right. So sort of the first stop for us is UK small businesses, which includes landlords, but we're now moving up into larger UK businesses as well. And in the future, the plan is to start protecting homeowners. And then to move internationally and ultimately into different perils as well. So beyond flood, for similar reasons why people in high-risk areas struggle to get flood cover, for things like for earthquake, for hurricane, for wildfire, for all these other natural catastrophes that ultimately, sort of in the grand scheme of things, happen so rarely in history, that means that modelling them is very difficult and pricing the insurance is very difficult. We can start to protect people from all those types of perils as well. So in the near future, the company name may well have changed from something that does not actually have the word flood in the title.
Fantastic. And Adam, I know you've got your UK base location is in London. It's down near Waterloo, so a fabulously central location. I think you've got about 15 people and growing. I'd love to talk about the questions, or jump into the questions if that's all right with you. And I'd first love to know what a typical day looks like in the business for you right now.
Yeah, me too, David. Really, every day is so different, which I think is pretty typical for companies at our stage. Although, like, the dominant activities, it probably depends on the phase the business is in any given time. So at the moment we've got some pretty big ambitions for this year. So Ian and I are spending a lot of time on strategic planning and resource allocation for that. But any given day could involve meetings with the insurance partners that provide the financial backing for the policies we write, working with our distribution team on key brokers and key clients, interviewing candidates to join the team, internal strategy, one-on-ones with the team, investor meetings, approving content for release, working on the finances, recording podcasts, of course, and potentially some combination of all of the above.
Yeah, no, never a dull day even in the flood insurance business.
Yeah,
of course.
exactly.
So it's always go. Who's had an impact on you? Is there anyone perhaps who's had an impact on you as a leader? Perhaps who supported you, and how did they impact your life so far?
Good question. I find it sort of hard to sort of pinpoint sort of someone from my own life, outside all of the kind of, usual answers of sort of, parents and teachers, et cetera, et cetera. I think all of those have had a sort of influence on me. I think, they can't not. I think I remember being sort of struck by, I remember seeing two interviews in quite close succession, to each other. One with two of the sort of, I guess, most sort of charismatic sort of public leaders, albeit in very different spheres. At the moment, which is with Barack Obama being interviewed by I think it was David Attenborough actually, and Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager, being interviewed by I think it was by about a 7-year-old kid for a PR piece. And like, the thing that really struck me from both of those, in that in both of them, the person who was meant to be the subject of that interview almost became the interviewer. They had like such humility, and that displayed such interest in their interviewer, that it really kind of changed the dynamic. And I remember at the time being really struck by the importance of that humility. I think we are safe to say we are, nothing like operating in the realms that those guys are yet. But if we and sort of all the team can, keep that level of humility about everything that we do, I think we'll be in a really, really strong place.
Fantastic. So look those two up on YouTube if you get time.
Yeah.
What are you doing from the top to keep your employees engaged?
Yeah, so I think we several things really. I think we really believe in in those things that that really truly help somebody to be engaged with their with their own career, their own job, which is really all about kind of autonomy and mastery. Really, the default assumption here is that everyone's always working hard, and we've hired as a team as accomplished in their various fields as we have, precisely so they can bring their expertise to the table from day one. At a startup, there are no token jobs. Everybody is doing what they're doing and is here because we need them to do what they're doing. Everybody is here because they bring something to the table that Ian and I did not have between the two of us when we started. We trust people to do things. We trust people to make their own decisions. We trust people to come to us if they want to check with something. But if they make a call, we will always back them. I think having that autonomy is really important. And the other, also, just in a very material way, every employee here at the company has an equity stake in FloodFlash. Similarly, we think that is only right that everybody sort of shares in the success of kind of what they are building.
Fantastic. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing business leaders right now today, Adam?
So again, great question, and the really unhelpful answer, but I suspect it's probably the correct one, is that it varies for everybody. Is it the sort of, is it like the Tolstoy's quote of every happy family is identical. Every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. I think no business is perfect, and every business is imperfect in their own ways. The challenges that faces each one is totally different. I think
what do you see as the wider industry, maybe perhaps the wider industry?
Yeah. So so for the industry as a whole, for the insurance industry, that sort of talent recruitment, especially kind of people up and coming out of university is or even school is always going to be something that's going to be really important to when you are, particularly when you're looking at quantitative grads that, in years past may have gone into like kind of actuarial sciences and things like that. Now there's a lot of money, outside of financial services and in the tech industry. It's easy for people to be pulled in that direction, and there are some really, really interesting problems for people to be working on in that direction as well. And I think that probably does exist. That probably does exist far beyond insurance. I'm sure. In almost every industry in the world, talent recruitment is the key thing.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, good question. I often struggle, with the startups, so much advice is sort of thrown your way all the time. Some of it solicited, some of it unsolicited, and I often struggle to think of one piece of advice that hasn't been entirely contradicted by another piece of advice. But maybe almost like before setting up the business, the piece of advice that was almost probably least most influential in terms of kind of its ramifications was maybe on a talk on sort of entrepreneurship that we had when I was back at school, and I've always had this fascination with entrepreneurship, and it really was just as simple as just do it, or JFDI was actually how he phrased it, and obviously I'll let you infer what the extra letter was, but I think that was really it. You'll never, you'll always, you're much more likely to regret the things that you don't do rather than the things that you do. And giving it a go is the most important thing. And I'm sort of very lucky that when it came to the time of being able to sort of start the business, I was in a position where if it did all go horribly wrong, I would be able to go back to my parents or my fiance Hetty's parents, and they would put a roof over our heads if we while we sort of sorted ourselves out. but that advice I think was really important for getting the business going. I mean, it's a bit different these days. As the business grows, the strategy does require serious consideration and serious thought. Now that we've got our customers' livelihoods, our team's careers, and our investors' cash to all consider, it is every piece of advice is kind of appropriate for its own time, as it were.
So what's really exciting you in the industry right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I got into insurance, and particularly catastrophe insurance, because it straight away seemed to me to be a really interesting blend of science and finance, and I think that still holds true today. And that ability to share and transfer risk is one of the most vital fuels of any economy. Businesses don't start without insurance. Planes don't get off the ground without insurance. It is absolutely imperative to almost everything. But about specifically now, I think the thing that excites me and the team here at FloodFlash is really the sort of increase in computing power that becoming available allows us to model natural hazards like floods at such a resolution that it makes products like FloodFlash available to the wider market for the first time, and also the rolling out of low power, low cost IoT networks, like something called narrowband IoT, for example, is being rolled out in the UK. Similar network called Cat M1 in Europe and the States. Those technologies in turn allow a whole new set of technologies, like sensor-driven parametric insurance, to take the industry to places where it has never been before. And I think we as a team are really on the bleeding edge of that, and I think that is really exciting.
What just going on from that, and you talk about IoT and the next generation of technology that is going to be an enabler. How do you educate the wider perhaps population or consumer who is thinking, how am I going to protect myself, but they're not really sure where to go, and what are they supposed to do?
Yeah. I mean, great question. So, so for us particularly, because our initial set of customers are small businesses, by far the majority of small businesses in the UK use their insurance broker to help them with that, decision. So they are, that is, where the majority of our distribution goes, and those brokers are really, really valuable partners to us. They sort of work hard setting their helping their customers manage their risk, and particularly those customers who are kind of abandoned by the traditional market, help them understand how to use FloodFlash and how to use parametric insurance to protect themselves as efficiently as possible. And in turn, it's our job to make sure the brokers are as well placed as possible to do that. It's quite a step change. It's not just a sort of slight graduation or a sort of slight evolution of the way both the brokers and their clients are used to thinking about insurance. It is quite a step change. We get that. We totally get that. Albeit in many ways it's sort of similar to like the telematics boxes used in cars, by using technology to improve that experience. That education piece is super important. It is. We consider what we're trying to do is trying to create a whole new category of product, a whole new category of insurance, and like any category creation, education is an absolutely unavoidable part of that.
What are you doing? Well, I was going to say well-being is quite important. It's very important within organisations. What are you doing really to improve the well-being of your employees now and in the future?
Yeah, agreed. It's so important. And again, I think the autonomy that we sort of chatted about earlier is a key part of that. We really, we don't expect people to be, in the offices for certain times or sort of stay certain hours. We definitely don't have a sort of FaceTime or bums on seats culture. We trust people to manage their time, so some of them will head to the gym during the day or at a time that works for them. If they want to get home to see their kids, like that is absolutely fine. Or if they need to work from home to get the headspace just to concentrate on something, we allow them to do that. I think imposing unnecessary structure when you have a team sufficiently talented that they don't actually need that is only gonna be sort of unnecessary shackles. We then sort of more material things like we provide like group life insurance for everybody through our friends at another insurtech startup called ULife, who also provide an app to sort of encourage daily activity, meditation, headspace, and things like that. The well-being of the team is absolutely essential to what we're doing.
So I'm going to ask you to think back a little bit about your childhood, if that's all right. And I was just interested to hear about anything particularly from your childhood that influenced your work ethic in later life.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to say. I think my friends from school would probably be at the front of the queue to say my work ethic during my childhood wasn't the greatest. I was sort of lucky enough to be able to get by on just the effort I put in. But I think the thing that is so influential on my work ethic now is really having ownership of something and the mission that we believe in. So Ian and I both really believe that ownership and alignment of incentives is so important for any organization, especially at this stage, which is why we're sort of so insistent that every member of the team, has that equity stake in the company, and will share in the company's success. We think that is only the right way to do things.
Adam, can you tell me what you think your industry is going to look like in 5 years' time, and how that might impact your business model?
Yeah, absolutely. I like this question. So I think it will look very different, but not in the way that a lot of people expect. I think there's a lot of sort of hope and expectation in certain quarters that there will be a sort of a Monzo of insurance, if you like, which I don't think there will be. I think there are fundamental differences between the world of banking and the world of insurance that means that isn't the case. If I'm managing my finances on Monzo, I'm taking my phone out and looking at them every single day. But that isn't really how insurance works. I want to engage with it once a year, know that I'm protected, and have that be that. I don't want to be going into an app every day to sort of adjust my insurance cover. So I don't think we will see one of those. Although I'm very prepared to be proven wrong. The thing that I really believe will look different is that via that increase in computer power and the sort of deployment of those low-cost, low-power sensor networks that we talked about, is that parametric insurance will have taken a huge chunk out of that $41 billion a year of uncovered flood damage that we talked about, and for all perils that figure is $160 billion. Every single year that goes uncovered, and actually that is about 70 to 80% of global losses. And given that insurance is meant to be there to protect people from catastrophe, it's difficult to really say the global insurance market is really doing its job if that level of it is if that level of damage goes uncovered. I think we've seen from the reinsurance market, and that's the anecdotes like the one about the New York subway earlier, that parametric insurance is the most efficient way to cover those risks. So that I think will be a real step change in the way insurance is seen in 5 years.
Okay, last question for you, Adam, and thanks for sharing that. If you had your time again then, and you're giving your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would you say?
Yeah, another good question, and I think my answer to this has changed quite a bit in the last few years. I went into something pretty catastrophe modeling for catastrophe bonds and insurance-linked securities in the insurance market, which was sort of niche part of a niche, of a niche part of a niche industry, and after a few years of that, I did worry to myself, had I done something too specialist? I did have this itch that I wanted to do, really try and sort of build a business and do something like this. But I worried that I had, become too specialized too early, and I wasn't picking up enough sort of wider business skills. And I strongly considered going into strategy consulting and that sort of thing. But now, so if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said, do something more generalist. But actually now I completely retract that, because going into something so specialist so early is actually what allowed me, and Ian to an extent, but he has a sort of, he's the brains of the operation with a PhD and all the rest of it, so he already had a lot of specialist skills, to pick up the, without trying to sound too much like Liam Neeson, a very specialist set of skills to be able to solve a real problem that actually we wouldn't have picked up had we gone into something that generalist. And so I think, that sort of don't be afraid of specialization, I think, is what I would say. What I would say to myself, and even if it starts to, to kind of feel closed off, that opportunity will present itself if you really want it to.
Brilliant. I thanks for sharing that, Adam. It's really good to hear your thoughts on it. And thanks for doing the podcast today. Hey, one quick question I had for you, by the way, is who came up with the name for the company?
Oh, I think that was me. I think it was definitely kind of I think the original idea more Ian. I think I'm possibly responsible for the name. I think we put it in and said, right, that'll be a good placeholder until we come up with something else. And here we are, 3 years later.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Sounds good. Look, thanks for joining us. If people, and really appreciate your time today, Adam, if people want to find out more about you, find out more about the company, what's the best way that they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can either email us at inquiries@floodflash.co, or our website is www.floodflash.co. There's a 80-second video on there which explains the business and what we do far more eloquently and efficiently than I do. So I definitely recommend giving that a watch. And if you are a small business, if you're in a high flood risk area and sort of worried about the cover that you might have, speak to your insurance broker.
Fantastic. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, David.
We really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you want to listen to more exclusive tips and life lessons from our guest, go to the resources page at vineresources.com.